Welcome to the Liberated Leader podcast. I'm your hostess, B. Chan. Together, we'll connect with leaders in the psychedelic space and explore the creations they birthed into this world, all in hopes to bring the psychedelic renaissance into the 21st century and spread the message of inner healing. Because when we heal ourselves, we heal the world. So, let's get liberated. Hey everyone, welcome back to season 2 of the Liberated Leader podcast. This season, we thought to change it up a little bit. And so we're exploring with a few different segments that we want to add to the show to give you a more well-rounded experience here with us. So I'm just going to do it for this one season. And you let me know if you like it or not. And you can leave us a comment on our YouTube video or YouTube channel, message us on IG. We're at Akita Agency, or whatever your preferred choice of method to communicate is. Snail mail, pigeon carrier, whatever. So this first segment is called Tripping Tips, because I'm going to give you some tips on when you're tripping. I do have to say that, this is not giving advice. This is not research-backed or scientifically studied or anything like that. I'm just dispensing knowledge that I acquired through my own personal experiences. So your mileage may vary. Take what you want from it and discard the rest. And please get professional help if you need it. Even if you don't think that you need it, we are living in very interesting times in this crazy-ass world. So maybe a little check-in with a coach or a guide or a counselor could do you some good. Just saying. Okay, so tripping tips. In general, I would say that there are 3 stages when you go on a psychedelic trip. There's prepare, there's journey, and then there's integrate. And so I'm going to give a tip on each of the 3 stages, and I'm going to tie it in nicely with basically a common theme, okay? So I want to talk a bit about... Okay, so the theme is your set. I think we've all heard about set and setting before. So I want to talk more about set this week and give you some tips on what I found helpful. So a little history on set and setting. So the concept of set and setting was first introduced by Timothy Leary and his colleagues at Harvard, and they laid it out in their 1964 psychedelic guidebook, The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So according to this double-blind magazine article here, so set and setting respectively refer to the internal and external factors that influence your psychedelic experience. So your set is a reflection of your inner climate, your mood, personality, beliefs, perceptions, and so on. So now that you know what that is, I think that's the first step in preparing that there is such thing as set and setting. I'll talk a lot more about all the other factors that I think are important as well as we move along each episode. So set. Remember that this is, and this is how I differentiate between set and setting, because they're very similar words, right? Your set is your mindset and setting is your physical setting. So we're just going to talk about the mindset for this segment here. So a tip while journeying that's in relation to set is really making sure that you have the right mindset to be having a psychedelic journey right now. Are you worried or stressed out about something that just happened? How do you feel about psychedelics? Have you convinced yourself that it doesn't work or that it's an evil drug that will melt your brain? Are you at your baseline right now? How do you feel, going into the journey? Are you actually ready for this? And if you're not, it's also okay to speak up and not allow other people to pressure you into something that you're not mentally ready for right now. Now, there is a difference between somebody giving you a little push and you psychologically, mentally, kind of emotionally being sound, being stable, being solid enough to go into a journey. Because if you are not in the right mindset, it could actually damage you a lot more than it can heal you, right? And one tip on set while integrating is, I think the most common or maybe obvious way is meditation, right? And I think a lot of people has misconceptions about meditation, and I can be epically wrong about it. But I think most people think that it's like a Zen monk style, you're sitting cross-legged and you're just like, I don't know, chanting ohms the whole entire day, and you're just focusing on your breath, and you're there sitting in silence. But it's not, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. Yes, there is the Zen monk style where you're just kind of focusing on your breath. You're focusing on your inhales and exhales. And you might be like taking in longer breaths, maybe a count of 4. And each time you do it, you might increase that count. So like you're inhaling for 4 seconds, you're exhaling for 4 seconds. And then the next one, you do 5 seconds, inhale, 5 seconds, exhale, and so on and so forth until you reach, X number. Right? I learned how to meditate when I went to a Buddhist monk meditation retreat. It was a silent meditation retreat that I didn't even know about. It was an intro. So it was like a 2-day type thing. I did that in Thailand, and they actually taught us how to meditate while we're walking, while we're sitting, while we're laying down. And yes, it's really easy to fall asleep, but you try not to. And yeah, that's where I also learned that it's not just sitting there and closing your eyes, right? Meditation to me means whatever that keeps you in the present moment, keeps you in the here and now. And there is a kaleidoscope of different types of meditation that you can do. For example, there's like progressive muscle relaxation, right? So you're focusing on each part of your body and you are focusing on relaxing that particular part of your body, right? There's guided meditation. And I would definitely recommend that as, it's the easiest way to start, I think. You're just listening and you're just doing what that voice is asking you to do. And you don't have to think about it because you have that certain thing to focus on already. There's also, chanting meditation, right? You're just repeating a phrase in your head over and over and over again. And that's kind of what your mind is focusing on. And I know that the Zen monk style of meditation is really, it doesn't fit so well into our modern day society because we've just been trained by technology, our media, and everyone else around us that it's go, 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 go. It's like all this kind of like hustle attitude and culture that we have and that we pride ourselves on, when really I think one of the ways to access happiness in life is to slow things down and really just enjoy and to be in the here and now and the present and not allow these future worries or past regrets to come in and be here in your current reality. Another tidbit in relation to meditation would be on Netflix, there is a show, I think maybe it's like a mini series or something called Headspace Guide to Meditation. And essentially you can just turn that on and follow along and it will explain to you what meditation is, how to use meditation. And there's like a guided meditation as well. For me, I find that, yes, there's a lot of chitter chatter in my head. There's a lot of monkey mind going around, and it is hard for me to do a Zen monk style. And so I found other ways to keep myself in the presence. And one of those ways is actually going to the gym and lifting. I find that there's enough physical strain on my body. And the fact that I'm mentally or even physically counting the reps that I'm doing, it keeps me right here. I don't have the capacity or the space for my mind to wander, for my mind to think about, what I have to do for work, or like I forgot to email this person, or need to, touch base with so-and-so, or what am I having for lunch? Like none of that type of stuff. And meditation, I think, is very flexible to the point where you can mix it in with different integration or healing modalities so that you're basically stacking it on. And I can jump more into that next time. And that's our tripping tip of the week. The Liberated Leader podcast is brought to you by Akita, a kick in the ass agency. We specialize in helping female psychedelic coaches who want to impact a global community by evolving their heart-based business to reach more people and fucking change the world. We are the first growth consultancy that provides website, branding, and evergreen funnel solutions at the intersection of marketing, technology, and design. As a complimentary gift to our listeners who are interested in the healing potential of psychedelics, we personally curate an ever-growing list of psychedelic coaches, guides, therapists, and clinics in North America that meet our standards of operation for you to have a safe, guided, intentional journey with. Just click on the link in the show notes and enter your email to get access. And now on to the conversation with this week's podcast guest. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to season 2 of the Liberated Leader podcast. Today, I'm super excited because we have Marc Goldgrub. Marc Goldgrub with us. He is the founding lawyer at Green Economy Law Professional Corporation, which is a boutique Toronto-based corporate, commercial, and environmental law firm specializing in work with green businesses and nonprofits, as well as parties working in the health and psychedelic sectors. He is licensed to practice law in Canada and in the United States, and was formerly a resident associate at the New York media and entertainment firm Grubman, Shire, Marcellus and Sachs. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Hello, good to be here.
Yes, so good to have you. So let's jump right in. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to find green economy law?
So I went to law school in the United States. This is a short version. There's actually a longer version that people could find through my website, YouTube. But anyways, the short version is I went to law school in the United States, in New York. I graduated from law school, and then I took the New York bar. I went on a little post-bar vacation in Scandinavia, came back, had trouble getting into the country, got in. This is when Trump was president. Worked for almost a year at a firm, and then decided to come back to Canada because I was not a big fan of Trump's America. I was not super comfortable there. I'm from Toronto, so I came back to Toronto. And then when I came back to Toronto, I had to get licensed here. After getting licensed in New York, had to get licensed in Toronto. I got licensed in early 2020. And I was speaking to some firms about potentially working at other firms, big firms in Toronto. But everybody told me if I worked at the firm, I would get paid like a first year. And I was really interested in working with renewables. Everybody told me maybe you'll do 5% renewables, 95% corporate commercial work. And that just really didn't sound like a great deal. I'd already been basically working post-bar for 2 years. So I said, all right, I'm not interested. I'm going to do my own thing. I want to work with companies in the green economy, renewables, waste. Basically, there's all kinds of incredible opportunities for people to contribute to the green economy, and I wanted to work with them. And that's what I do now. I started the firm February 2020, greatest time in the world to start your own law firm. And and I've been running it ever since. At some point, I decided to open up beyond just working with green businesses and nonprofits to work with companies involved in health. I am somebody who just cares a lot about health. It's something I think about a lot. I've had family members die of cancer, and that really inspired me to want to contribute and help out with regard to health however I could. Psychedelics was something I was interested in since I was a teenager, basically. But when I learned about how they are being used to help people with health issues, mental health and physical health issues, I thought this is a great place for me to get involved and try and contribute.
Amazing. That was one of my questions for you. Why did you pick psychedelic law? So that's great. So knowing that I was going to talk to you today, I kind of cast a wide net to my network to ask them if they have any questions, because I'll be talking to a psychedelic lawyer. And so I have a full list of them. The first one here would be, what are the basic legal things that we should know about while working in the psychedelic industry?
The basic things. So before I say anything legal, I should probably say that nothing I say in this podcast should be construed as legal advice. If you are looking for legal advice, you are welcome to contact me at mg@greeneconomylaw.com. You can go to psychedeliclaw.ca, which is a website I set up that attempts to cover everything you might want to know about Canadian psychedelic law. And you can, of course, contact me through that website. So what are the basic things? Well, let's start off with what is legal and what is not legal. This is something that people are actually they do not understand this as well as I would hope. And there's a lot of talk about things being gray market when they're not gray market, they're illegal. So first of all, no, it's legal. No, it's not. In Canada, we have legalized cannabis for adult recreational use. The age that you can use it differs slightly from province to province. Some provinces 18, some provinces 19. But hopefully we all know that that is legal in Canada now, but most other things are not. Psilocybin is illegal. DMT is illegal. LSD is illegal. These things are all prohibited under Canadian criminal law. And that's where I would start. Before I get into a full lecture on Canadian psychedelic law, I'll stop there and say that's the first thing people should know.
Sounds good. Just on that note, yes, psilocybin is not legal right now, but there are some jurisdictions, for example, Vancouver, where I am, where the police aren't really enforcing anything right now. How should we kind of interpret that?
You should interpret it in that the law is the law, and it's written on, well, it used to be written on paper. Now it's mostly written on the internet. But the law is one thing, and then what authorities choose to prosecute, what laws they choose to enforce, is a separate matter. For example, a great example of this is the DACA in the United States, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, where the Obama administration said, we're not going to enforce this law. We're going to make it a policy not to enforce this law. And then there was a big debate around Trump saying, I will enforce this law. But the law never changed. The only thing that changed was the policy with regard to enforcing the law. So in Vancouver, the police are choosing not to enforce psychedelic laws prohibiting the sale of certain psychedelics. And that's not a 100% thing. It's not like you can go to Vancouver from Toronto, where I am, and just feel like, okay, police don't enforce the law here. I can do whatever I want. They can, at any point, they can choose to enforce it, but it seems like they're choosing largely not to enforce it, which has given people the impression that it's decriminalized or that it's legalized or something, where it is totally illegal. It has not been decriminalized. And there have been some articles saying Vancouver votes to decriminalize, BC moves to decriminalize. Those articles are a little frustrating because their headlines are misleading. Vancouver and the province of British Columbia, neither of them have the authority to decriminalize psychedelics that are prohibited under federal law. In the US, municipalities, often what they'll do is they will pass a law making it enforcing drug prohibition laws against certain psychedelics. They'll make that the lowest priority, or a state will legalize. But in Canada, cities and provinces do not have that authority under Canada's Constitution and our division of powers. So there's a lot of confusion. People should know these things in Vancouver, completely illegal, but the police have discretion as to what they want to focus their time and resources on.
I totally agree in terms of, it's very gray. A lot of people don't actually know, myself included. So thank you so much for clearing the air there. So kind of going back to the legal basics, like the 101s that we should know, other than knowing what is legal and what is not legal, is there anything else that we should be mindful and aware of?
Yes. Well, that's the first thing people should be aware of. And then I guess there are secondary things where, and this, we talked a little bit about this earlier off the podcast, where we were talking about how there is a psychedelic industry around psychedelics that is not involved in the sale or production of psychedelics. There are all kinds of people who are guides and coaches, and they sell paraphernalia, and they do all kinds of things that are totally legal around a center that is illegal, around products that are prohibited. Those people should be concerned that they're towing the line, that they're not crossing over into territory where they're doing anything illegal, which can be tricky. And this also differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. If I were in the US, for example, I would be more concerned about crossing that line than in Canada, especially because states have criminal law jurisdiction. So in Canada, we only really have to be worried about, in terms of criminal liability, the federal criminal law. In the United States, there is the federal criminal law under which psychedelics are prohibited. And then there's also the state criminal law, which could prohibit psychedelics, could prohibit advertising, could prohibit all kinds of activities. I don't know, all 50 states' state laws as they apply to psychedelics, but that is more concerning. So people should be making sure that they're not crossing any lines, and also concerned that they're not getting involved in civil liability. that they're not opening themselves up to civil liability, either at a provincial or municipal or state level, but also with regard to their dealings with customers, clients, etc. If somebody has a bad experience, they're harmed in some way, mentally or physically, you could potentially be liable. They could sue you. So this is something to just be concerned about. Now, I guess I don't want to talk about this too long, but there's also another issue where, so let's say you're a very proactive person and you are trying to protect yourself to the extent that the law permits, and you're trying to make sure that you're operating within the bounds of the law. And you have contracts and you have insurance and you're incorporated. Those things can also become not as protective if you're getting involved in criminal activities. A judge won't look at a contract that says, I'm providing you with psychedelic therapy and I'm going to give you the mushrooms and you're not going to sue me. The judge is going to say, well, you're involved in illegal activities, so I'm not really inclined to give you the protection of the law with regard to your contract. So these things can get very tricky. People should be thinking about these things and being careful.
That's super interesting. So many thoughts going through my head right now. But, the number one thing that I'm hearing is even if you have, an incorporation or have a contract in place, that kind of negates any protection if you are involved in criminal activity. So that's really good to know. So in terms of, being, I guess, like two separate streams here that will go down, but like as a guide or trip sitter or coach, how do we avoid getting in trouble? Like, what can we do to minimize our risk and exposure there?
You should call a lawyer, probably. But it really will depend on what you're doing. In some cases, having documentation could be helpful. In some cases, it could not. If you have all kinds of documentation that's going to be used against you later, then the documentation's not great. Then again, there might be a certain situation where somebody says, I was... what's that TV show with Nicole Kidman, 9 Perfect Strangers? Somebody could say, I was given psychedelics and I never consented to it. And you might, in a situation like that, be happy to have a contract that they sign that says in big, bold letters, I consent to, consumption of psychedelics and accept the associated risks. Now, that contract's I'm not saying go write that contract, because a judge might look at it and say, well, you can't consent to the use of illegal substances, and we're not really inclined to help you out now because you have this contract. But having that contract could theoretically be helpful just to show that you didn't dose someone against their consent. But at the end of the day, don't do illegal things. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
There's no legal advice here, but don't do illegal things. You want to not get in trouble, don't do illegal things. And beyond that, things get very tricky.
For sure. Has there ever been so for example, as a coach, right? Typically they are helping with the kind of like coaching aspects before and after the actual journey of it. So they're not touching any medicine, they're not selling, they're not giving anything away. It's purely just more like therapeutic or intentional type coaching. Is that totally legal? Is that good? Is that kosher?
The answer is well, first of all, I guess if we talk about Canadian law, on the face of it, you might be okay. I don't really honestly know. If somebody came to me and said, I'm a coach, can you write me a memo telling me what I have to do to make sure I'm on the right side of the law? I would look into it and give them an answer. At this time, nobody's come to me with that question yet, although some people have come to me saying that I might need that answered in the near future. But so in the meantime, I don't know. It will also depend on what jurisdiction you're in. Like I said, in Canada, I might be a little less worried. In the States, I definitely be more worried and be checking what are those federal laws, what are the state laws, and it's dicey. It's hard to say. It will depend on a lot of things, and I'm not 100% sure what the answer is right now for any jurisdiction.
Okay, sounds good. What about if you are somebody who is, buying psychedelics and consuming in your own private residence? Like, what is the actual I guess different degrees of penalty that you'll get if you are caught?
Will depend on the jurisdiction. In Canada, so let's say possession of something like psilocybin is illegal under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. It will depend on a lot of things. There's not it's not like a super obvious thing exactly what you're going to get. And also right now the government is not inclined to go after, the federal government is not inclined to prosecute people for possession of psychedelics, simple possession, especially if you have a very small amount. Now, I say they're not inclined. That doesn't mean that they will not do it. There's a lot of discretion all along the chain of enforcement, but the federal government has indicated that it is a lot more concerned about opioids right now than possession of psychedelics. So you can get in trouble, depending on the circumstances. It can be trouble you really don't want, but it will depend a lot on the circumstances.
So, for example, would you be looking at things like just a warning or like a fine? Like, at what point would we actually be like going to jail?
A lot more likely if you're, the Pablo Escobar of LSD. You're probably you're probably a lot more at risk of going to jail than if you went and bought some mushrooms from your neighbor. It's probably not in the interest of the federal government to prosecute you for buying those mushrooms. Like I said, it doesn't mean that they won't, but it might not be in their interest in terms of how they want to use their time and resources. So definitely, if you're selling, you're a bigger risk than if you just have personal possession for personal use, and the amount that you have is also going to be play into it. And I've had conversations also with clients where they say, what about the purpose? What if I'm selling like microdosing for the purpose of, really helping people? And it's very clear from what I'm doing that I'm not, I guess, what you would classically think of as a drug dealer, but I'm acting in a very benevolent and healing capacity, if that's my intention. And I happen to be breaking the law, but will a judge or a prosecutor look at that and take it into account? And my answer was, it is entirely possible. They can take everything into account, and you would hope that they would, but it really will depend on who is looking at the situation along the chain of law enforcement.
100%, yeah. And I guess at what point do we, like, if we get in trouble, at what point do we engage with a lawyer?
Probably sooner than later.
Like, for example, if we just get a fine, I don't even know if that's one of the penalties, but if we just get a fine, is that too small of a case to have somebody like you help? Or
it's if you just get a fine and there's no criminal record, I mean, I guess it's up to you, really. A big issue is criminal record. In Canada, I will say in Canada versus the US, our judicial system, as I understand it, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, but I had to learn about criminal law in law school. It was on the bar exam, on the Ontario bar exam. I've spoken to criminal lawyers about this stuff. So I have some understanding, but I don't have up close and personal experience with Canada's judicial system. But from what I understand about it versus the US, and I did, as I mentioned, I went to law school in the US, Canada's criminal law system seems really determined to not put people behind bars, not give them criminal records. It is, compared to the US system, as I understand it, fairly humanitarian. At least that's what it looked like to me when I was learning Canadian criminal case law versus American case law. Whereas in the US criminal law system, as I studied it, it didn't look like there was a real concerted effort to keep people out of jail and not have criminal records. In Canada, there's diversion where people will come up with ways to try and keep people out of the criminal law system, keep people out of prison, keep them from having criminal law records or criminal records. So at what point do you call in a lawyer? Probably soon, like I said, sooner than later. Your own personal circumstances in terms of financial ability to pay for a lawyer. There are public defenders, there are public resources that you can make use of. So you might want to look into that first of all. As I understand it from dealing with housing law issues, some of those organizations that provide pro bono service, some of them are overwhelmed right now. So it is possible that you might try and get a pro bono criminal lawyer through public aid of some sort, and they'll just not have a lot of time, or even if they, to take on your case, and even if they do take it on, they might not have sufficient time to give the attention that it should have. You might have a bad experience depending on your lawyer. I guess that actually applies to paid lawyers too. So let me just bring things back to your original question. When do you get a lawyer? If you can, I would say as soon as you can. You're probably going to be better off than not having a lawyer. And there are plenty of situations where, like I'll give another well-known example, the Central Park Five, where they were young kids speaking to a prosecutor and said things that a lawyer would have told them, do not say these things. They would have benefited from having a lawyer. And probably a lot of people in our judicial system would benefit from having a lawyer to make sure that they're not walking into situations that they don't want to walk into.
I totally agree. It's kind of like, prepping someone to go on media. It's like media coaching, like legal coaching. So you don't incriminate yourself even further. Okay. Quick question, because you touched on, while you were studying the law in both the US and in Canada, you kind of interpret Canadian law to be a little bit more like humanitarian. Do you think that has a lot to do with the fact that in the US, the prison system is privatized?
Well, it's not entirely privatized, but there is a private element in the prison system, which I would, from what I understand, probably is not a healthy thing to have in any society. I'm definitely not pro private prisons. That creates really problematic incentives. In terms of, I don't know if that totally explains everything, though. I think that a lot of it has to do with our culture. I think that there is a big racial issue where in the US, there is, criminal justice is so deeply entwined with racism and historical racism, systemic racism in the US. I do think that plays a part. Not to say Canada's perfect, but I think that we don't have the same systemic issues that they have in the US. And there's also kind of like a American attitude towards, what's the word, like vengeance or punishment. There's a bit more of like that's what it's, at least what it seems like to me. Maybe some people take issue with that, but it seems like there's an attitude of really wanting to punish people more in the US than in a lot of other countries that have a more forgiving attitude. I think that's a largely cultural thing.
That's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that I've heard with my American friends versus my Canadian friends, and I would agree to it as well, where like in America, they're a lot more litigious than we are here in Canada.
There's that too.
For sure. Okay, bringing it back to some of these questions here. What do we need to be aware of when we're crossing the border into the US or just going outside of Canada?
Don't bring anything illegal.
Yes, don't bring anything. Don't bring anything. Don't bring any medicine.
Don't bring illegal stuff across the border. And if you're not sure, don't bring it. Don't even, don't bring stuff that could even be illegal.
Okay. Next question here is, how about like ancillary services? Like, for example, I do marketing for psychedelic coaches, and there could be people who are consulting for either public or private corporations, and like accountants who do work for, psychedelic people. What are the kind of risks or exposure that we should be aware of? And should we be concerned there? Like, how do we protect ourselves?
So again, I think it depends on jurisdiction. In Canada, I'm not super worried about people providing ancillary services, especially, in terms of criminal law, as long as you're not getting involved in the actual thing. If you're just providing ancillary services, you're probably fine. It already seems like the federal government doesn't want to go after people dealing with especially small amounts of psychedelics. So I don't really see the appetite to go after people on the secondary rung of those activities. Something to maybe be concerned about is civil liability. Something that's very common in a lot of contracts is indemnity, where people enter into a contract and they say, if something goes wrong, if somebody sues you, you're going to indemnify me, you're going to cover me so that I don't get in trouble just by virtue of association with you, which sometimes happens. Sometimes people will file a lawsuit against a party and they might try and bring in a bunch of other parties, anybody else that they can, to see who they could maybe get money out of. And if you're getting roped into a lawsuit, you really want to have a contract that says that the party at the center of things is going to indemnify you so you don't get in trouble. So let's say you're working with somebody who provides like psychedelic assisted therapy on the underground level, and they get sued for malfeasance, doing things that they shouldn't be doing, whatever it may be. And the person suing is alleging physical and psychological damages or something along those lines, and they try and just get everybody, they just try and rope everybody in, and then you might be happy to have an indemnity clause in your agreement with the person at the center of things. And you might also be happy to have insurance in a situation like that. Being incorporated could also be helpful, as long as at the end of the day you can say, look, I didn't do anything illegal here, and I didn't assist with anything illegal. I'm just doing, my legal part of things, and this person at the center, they're doing what they're doing. I mean, if what they're doing is clearly illegal, like very clearly illegal, you might not be as safe as you want to be. But you want to have a good argument that you're not involved in any illegal activities. You're just providing ancillary services. There are things you can do to increase the chance that you're going to be protected if a situation like that arises. But I kind of at the end of the day, being involved in illegal stuff is tricky. And I guess this might be a good time to say it, I don't work with parties involved in illegal activities. If somebody comes to me and says, I want to know if what I'm doing is illegal, then I can help them know that. But if I find that it's illegal, I will tell them, look, I can't help you if you're doing illegal stuff. I can't do that. That's going to get me in trouble with the Law Society, with my professional responsibility. And it might be good for other people in certain other similar situations to have a similar policy. And if they don't, there are things that they can do to try and insulate themselves. But there's always a risk when you're involved in illegal activities, even by proxy. So things to think about.
Definitely things to think about for sure. One of my last questions from the group here is, in your professional opinion, what year do you think psilocybin will be legalized in Canada and the US? And then how about the other major psychedelics like MDMA and LSD? But, I don't think any of us have a crystal ball. So I'm going to replace that question with, what do you think the psychedelic legal landscape would look like about 10 years from now?
I mean, I hope it looks very different. I guess let me give two possible alternative futures. In one alternative future, people really pick up on the momentum of cannabis legalization and move forward very quickly. And we do see a certain amount of this happening. Activities involving legal use of psilocybin in Canada have progressed quite quickly over the last couple of years. In the US, we've seen some very encouraging activity at the state level, notably in Oregon, obviously. In terms of when that reaches the federal level in Canada or the US, in Canada, the stuff that's happening is happening at the federal level. I really would like the federal government, the Trudeau government, to say, we're doing it, we're legalizing psychedelics, or we're decriminalizing, or we're doing something between those things. I would really like to see that happen. I think if that happens in the near term, which doesn't seem impossible to me, and the Liberals and the NDP and Greens have all said that they are at least open-minded, if not fully supportive of psychedelic legalization. The Canadian Psychedelic Association actually asked all the parties before the last election in September 2021, they said, what is your stance on legalizing psychedelic therapy? And the Liberals said, we're open to it. NDP said we're for it. Green Party basically said we're for it. Conservatives didn't reply. Bloc didn't reply. And I don't know I think they did ask the PPC, and I don't think they replied either. There is a bit of a lift involved. And I think that the federal government in Canada is treading carefully, and maybe they're not really into running into psychedelic legalization, which is going to be a contentious issue super soon, especially while they're dealing with COVID. So if there is some advocate within the federal government who says, I want to do this, I think this would be really good, and I want to do it soon. We in Canada, we just had an election relatively recently. This is a really good time to make it a sticking issue, to just get it done. Legalize psychedelic therapy. It could just be for psilocybin and MDMA to start. Not saying that I want it to start, only be those things or stop there, but it could be. You could have somebody who says, I want to do this. This is going to be my issue, and I'm going to legalize it. And I think that what you would see in a situation like that is, once it was legalized and there was a whole industry built around it, the Conservatives and any other party that would oppose it would resign themselves to accepting it, which is what happened with cannabis. The Conservatives, like under Andrew Scheer, he said when he was running for Conservative leadership and when Prime Minister, he said, I'm not going to reverse cannabis legalization because people have jobs in that industry. I'm not going to take away anyone's job. If there's a whole industry full of jobs for people around psychedelics, then I don't think any party is going to want to take away those jobs. So if I were advising the federal government or people in the federal government, I would say, do it now, get it done now. And I did write an article about this saying this is, a great time to run on legalization, get it done now, and make Canada a real hotspot for it. I think that's a possible thing. That's not an impossible thing. We could see that happen in the next few years in Canada, in which case psychedelics in Canada in 10 years is a thriving industry that's super boring and everybody's totally used to it. And maybe it's not even cool anymore. Like cannabis, it's like, yeah, whatever. Like, it's just like becomes super normalized super quickly. I think that's a possibility. The other possibility is that things don't move very fast and we get a conservative government in Canada and nothing happens for another decade. In 10 years, things are no farther than they are now, which is what happened with cannabis in the 2000s. You had a liberal government under Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin that was moving towards decriminalization, that was thinking about legalization. And then when Stephen Harper got elected prime minister, that was over. It was, the kibosh, they put the kibosh on it, it was done. And it took until Trudeau got elected in 2015 for that to arise again as a realistic possibility in the US. So those are the two futures in Canada. It happens quickly or it doesn't happen at all. I mean, I could be wrong. It could happen in 7 years from now. And I could be like, well, I totally got that wrong. That may be exactly what happens, but those are the futures I see. In the US, it is tricky because they still haven't legalized cannabis at the federal level. Now the Republicans seem to be coming around to it, which is really interesting. And there is now, from what I understand, a Republican-led cannabis legalization bill. If the Republican Party can kind of shed its war on drugs attitude that it's had for so long, at least to some extent, then maybe there can be progress at the federal level. At the state level, it's happening. So I do think in 10 years at the state level, you're going to see a number of states, probably the usual suspects, Colorado, Washington, California, Oregon, that are going to have some kind of legalized psychedelic industry. At the federal level, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say in the US. I mean, politics there is so crazy. It's a lot less predictable than in Canada, to the extent that it's predictable here at all.
For sure. I can definitely understand from that point of view. Quick question about in the US, state law versus federal law. So for example, in say like Oakland, California, right, like the municipality, mushrooms is legal there, but then it isn't overall in a federal sense. So what trumps what? Like who trumps who?
I wouldn't even think about it in terms of trumping. I would think about it in terms of overlapping. That, for example, the more confusing thing is when you have cannabis legalized at the state level in numerous states, like a lot. I mean, almost all the blue states now, maybe like at least a ton of them. Cannabis legalization is just super common in a number of states, but it's illegal at the federal level in the US. So it's not an issue of does the federal law trump the state law? It's not an issue of trumping it. It's an issue of, okay, you legalize it at one level, but you still have this illegal umbrella over it. It's not a trumping, it's not a conflict. It's that you've removed, one level and there's still another level there where it's illegal. But the federal government, this is, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, it's about enforcement. How dedicated is the federal government in the US to enforcing its federal drug laws in the states when the states are not cooperative? And there was a bigger fight about that in the early 2000s than there is now, with regard to medical cannabis, actually, not with regard to recreational cannabis. So now when we talk about things like psilocybin legalization at the municipal level versus state level, it's the same kind of thing. Really, it's still illegal and it's an overlapping situation. They legalized it or made it lowest enforcement priority at the municipal level. It's still illegal at the state level, and the state can move to enforce it. The federal government can move to enforce it to the extent that they're willing to.
So for example, if I drive into Oakland, California, and it's totally legal there, I use it, all good. And then once I leave that municipality, if I were to get caught with it on my person, then I'm in trouble?
Let me go back. It's not totally legal there. It's not
okay.
It's that the city has chosen not
To
to
enforce it.
or made it a low priority federally.
Oh, okay.
It's not totally legal. You can go to Oakland and get arrested for psilocybin by California state troopers. You can get
Wow, this is so confusing. Like, how do people keep
yeah,
track?
no, it's it causes a lot of problems actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people think it's confusing in Canada. Actually, it becomes more confusing in Canada because we don't realize how different our constitutional division of powers is from the US. So people think that we have the same law, but it's actually totally different. So there's just confusion all over the place.
Well, I think bottom line is just don't do anything illegal.
Don't do anything
Yeah.
illegal. I'll give you that advice. Don't do illegal things.
Yeah.
Don't do illegal things, period.
There you go. Amazing. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now? What's next for you or, green economy law, and how would you like our listeners to support you?
So what I'm doing is, well, I'm always trying to build the firm, being a lawyer these days, especially like a solo lawyer or relatively solo lawyer, small firm, whatever. It is a little bit like being an influencer, which I'm not a fan of. I don't think a lot of lawyers went to law school to be influencers, but we do live in this like attention economy. So a lot of what I do ends up being trying to get attention, hopefully through providing helpful resources. And anytime, if you're other young lawyers probably know this too, that there are all kinds of webinars saying you got to provide helpful content, show people, how you can help and provide helpful resources. So that's something I focus a lot on, trying to provide helpful resources. So for example, I have a report on Canadian psychedelic law, 2022 report that you can find very easily at psychedeliclaw.ca. There's a link to it right from the homepage, from the front page. So I'm focusing a lot on that and wondering how I can put out more helpful resources, gain more credibility within the psychedelic community in Canada, and ultimately help people, one, with whatever they're doing, as long as it's legal, provide those legal services. And aside from that, help people understand psychedelic law so that people don't get in trouble, because there is so much confusion. And I do sometimes see information online and it's wrong. It'll say they decriminalized psilocybin in BC, and I'll say they didn't do that. And I do sometimes feel like a bit of a responsibility, like to clarify things, to help to make sure that people don't have confusion about things that could potentially lead to them getting in trouble. Because obviously I don't want anyone getting in trouble, definitely not for using psychedelics. And really I don't think that they should, but the law is what it is now. And we all want to hopefully try and change that so that it's more amenable to human flourishing. So that's what I'm working on. In terms of how people can support me, well, hopefully they can support me, help me help you. That's kind of what I would say. If you are doing a legal psychedelic thing and you're looking for legal services, hit me up. I'd love to help out to the extent that I can. And just, I don't know, be a good community member. Help your brother out, help your sister out, help everybody out.
Awesome. And where can our listeners connect with you online?
LinkedIn. And I have a newsletter, Green Economy Law monthly newsletter, which you can sign up for at my website, greeneconomylaw.com. Yeah, I'm not a big social media person. I keep a light on that. Which
Gotcha.
does cause problems when you live in kind of an influencer culture, but makes my mental life a little easier.
I understand. And one more thing I want to throw in there is the State of Canadian Psychedelic Law, the 2022 report that Marc was talking about. You guys can find that at psychedeliclaw.ca/2022-report. Cool. And some of the things that you cover in there, I downloaded it earlier and I was flipping through it, is, it has a really clear portion of it, of what is and isn't legal in Canada that I think can clear up a lot of things for people. So that even downloading it just to look at that section, I think is worth it.
And on psychedeliclaw.ca, I am always adding psychedelics. There's a section, like a heading, psychedelics, and I list all the psychedelics, and you can go to those pages and it says very clearly, this is legal, this is not legal, this is not criminalized. So I hope that's also a helpful resource to people. And I'm always adding to that. There are psychedelics that I didn't like, 5-MeO-DMT, which I thought was kind of an edge case. I didn't think like a lot of people were really using it in Canada, but I'm seeing more and more that it's actually a lot more popular than I thought. So I decided recently I have to put a page up on what's the legality of that, which is actually very difficult to find. And
Mm.
even I'm still like hoping, I hope that I read everything I need to read about it. I don't know, maybe there's more stuff out there, but it is hard to find.
For sure. And there's definitely a fan base for 5. There's definitely a fan base.
Yeah, I'm learning. I'm
Um,
learning that. I'm
yes.
learning that.
Okay, cool. Jumping into lightning round now. This is where I kind of rapid fire style ask you questions, and then you can answer in one word or one phrase. And then we'll wrap up from there. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do
Okay,
it.
cool. What is one resource, like a book, a website, a group of people in the psychedelic space? And I guess for you, specifically a psychedelic law that you would recommend people to follow?
Everybody's already read Michael Pollan's book, right? So, maybe that's not helpful if I say that, but that is a great book. That is a really great book. Beyond that, Dosed is also a really good documentary. I think probably a lot of your listeners are going to be familiar with it, but maybe some aren't, maybe especially because it's a Canadian documentary. It's about a young woman's struggle to deal with addiction through psychedelic assisted therapy. And that was interesting for me to see, one, because it was interesting to see that, well, I didn't even know what ibogaine was before I saw that documentary. And it was even more interesting to see that there were clinics offering that service in Canada. I think that the government since clamped down on them, and a lot of people are going outside of Canada for treatment like that. But it was really interesting to see that kind of treatment and how somebody would actually go through that process and struggle with it. And per the documentary, have quite a bit of success with it. So that's a good resource.
Okay. One word or one phrase? Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So who inspires you in the psychedelic space, or who inspires you in general?
I will say I do. All right, let me this has to be a one-word answer. I can't qualify this.
You can, but short. One phrase. Quick explanation.
We live in a society where we know too much about people. Nobody's like without their problems, so it's hard to pick one person. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is very inspirational. Not to say I agree with her on everything, but it is amazing that she kind of came up out of nowhere, just a person with a dedication to issues, and ran for Congress and is really making an incredible difference as a congresswoman. So I do find her inspirational.
Okay. Are you someone who asks for permission first or begs for forgiveness later?
I ask for permission because, I don't want to test how forgiving like the Law Society is or something. And we don't live in a very forgiving society these days. It's I ask permission. I'm sorry to say.
Okay. If you found out the world was ending in a year, how would you spend your time?
Probably van life. I'd do the van life thing. Yeah.
All right. And similar to that question, if you won the lottery and was set for life, how would you spend your money?
I'd do exactly what I'm doing.
Okay. That's great.
I would discount in my mind. I would discount the money. I'd be like, whatever, I didn't earn it. So whatever, I'm just going to do what I got to do to be helpful and successful in terms of actual real contribution.
Amazing. And what's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote is, resolve yourselves that if you are to be happy, happiness depends on freedom and freedom depends on courage, by Pericles, the funeral oration of Pericles. Unfortunately, these like the Freedom Convoy, I think is giving freedom a bad name, or a lot of like American politics has given freedom a bad name, but we should appreciate, I don't think the freedom to not care about other people and public health, I don't think that's real freedom. I think that freedom does come with responsibility. People defend freedom in all kinds of ways, some in the military, some through the legal system, and it requires courage.
So what was the quote again? To be happy.
There's a lot of different translations of it because it's from Greek, but it's like basically happiness depends on freedom and freedom depends on courage.
Courage. There we go. I really like that.
I like it too. Yeah. I heard that in a book about the Supreme Court Justice, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Louis Brandeis, who was a very humanitarian Supreme Court Justice. And he really liked that quote, and it was in the biography about him. And that's where I heard it and really liked it also.
Amazing. Thank you for introducing me to that.
No problem.
Okay. Well, I think that's a wrap. I learned a lot today. Thank you so much, Mark. And I'm sure our listeners did as well. And for people who are listening, if you are unsure about any of the ever-changing psychedelic legal regulations, please reach out to Mark and have a chat. And to Mark, you are a wonderful resource for us to have in our corner. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you for being an inspiration to all of the aspiring liberated leaders out there in the world. I'll catch you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Liberated Leader podcast. If you found value in today's episode, then please, 1, leave us a positive review, share it with a friend. 2, join our tribe on social. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, to your liberation and beyond.